Welcome to the District of Columbia, and in particular to Georgetown Law School. It's very good to see all of you here. I saw many of you at the reception last night, and I look forward to seeing the rest of you over the course of the next 2 days. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie Corrigan. I am co-director of Workplace Flexibility 2010, the policy initiative here at Georgetown Law School that I direct with Professor Hy Feldblum. And I've had the pleasure of working with Kathleen Christensen through our Sloan grant for the past number of years, and I am just so happy to be hosting this year's annual Sloan Conference of Sloan grantees and good friends. First of all, as Hy had mentioned yesterday, we were really happy when Kathleen asked us to host this conference. It's definitely a privilege to be a grantee, and we realize with privilege comes responsibility. So we gladly agreed.
You were hard-pressed to say.
All I know is
yes, exactly.
This is a metric in our grant, and I am. But anyway, so I have been to several Sloan conferences in the past, and to put it bluntly, when I've gone, I have learned so much, but also felt a bit like a fish out of water. I'm used to going to conferences where you talk about statutes and politics, and instead I was in conferences where we heard about methodologies, and thank goodness for at least the first one I was sitting next to Shelley McDermott, who was able to give me little hints on, okay, what's the debate here? I'm not sure why everyone is so heated. But, you know, I went to Chicago and at MIT, and Hy first went to the UCLA Sloan Conference, and we've always come back really energized about the community of people who work with Sloan and our colleagues of Sloan. But again, I always felt a little bit sometimes baffled, although interested. So when Kathleen asked us to host this year's conference, we said yes, but we also said, you realize this year's conference will look a little different because it's us. You know, we aren't going to pull off an academic research conference. There's nothing here that would suggest I could do that. But so instead, we're going to do what we always do, which is try and bring together the research perspective, the business perspective, and the public policy perspective to really talk through, okay, the research has identified a structural problem. There's a mismatch between the way work works right now and the needs of this changing workforce. So the question is, we've diagnosed it to some degree, so let's get that back out on the table, and you're going to hear from several great researchers today laying out both flexibility for hourly workers and flexibility for salaried workers. So it's like, let's diagnose that problem, and then let's talk about what those structural solutions might be. So when we think about the next couple days of this conference, I really want to use a term that we often use when we hold our meetings here at Georgetown of different advocacy groups and from different perspectives, and that is we would like to create essentially a rhetoric-free zone. We all have to make arguments all the time, whether it's in the context of academia to your deans and colleagues, in business with the bottom line, in the boardroom, you know, in whether it's, you know, sitting in a policymaker's office and arguing for a particular issue. So we're used to making arguments here. What we'd like to do over the next day and a half is really take a step back and hear what other people are saying, really listen, and see if we can come up with some new understandings about how we might want to move forward in this area. And that really is the unique position, I think, that at Workplace Flexibility 2010, I think we hold, and it's really been, I think of it as a luxury item because of the Sloan Foundation to create this space for conversation. So when we said yes to the conference, it really was an enthusiastic yes, because we look at this as just a continuation of the work we're already doing with some really, really good, smart friends. So welcome to Georgetown on behalf of myself and all the staff of Workplace Flexibility 2010. I'm now just going to turn it over to Kathleen for some further remarks, again, on kind of the broader goals and initiatives of the foundation itself. And then we'll turn to our first panel.
Thank you, Katie. I just ripped the tablecloth. Thank you. I am delighted to be here, and I believe this is actually our 12th annual meeting. So we went back to 1996 when Phyllis Moen hosted us in New York at the Cornell Club. I am delighted to be here. I see many old friends in our audience today. I also see many new people who I hope become friends over the coming years. And I particularly would like to welcome for our first year of early career work family scholars who have been supported through both our program through the Sloan Network and also through our grants program to the University of Pennsylvania. So a special welcome to all of you. And I'll reiterate what Hai said last evening. Please, all us old folks, reach out to the young scholars so that they become part of our community, which I feel is very vibrant and has been longstanding. I also particularly want to thank Hai Feldblum and Katie Corrigan for hosting this meeting. I know the amount of work that goes into it, particularly when it is one metric among many metrics. So it's not like everything stops to put on this meeting. And I think that what the two of you have done in planning these next 2 days is very exciting, and we're all going to come away more energized and with lots more ideas about solutions and approaches to those solutions. As I briefly mentioned last evening, I think this conference could not come at a more critically needed time. We know that the workforce has changed dramatically. The male breadwinner workforce of the past is really an artifact of the past. But the structure of the workplace, as we know it, has not kept up with the changes of this workforce. So this workforce, which is now made up significantly of two-earner households, single-parent, single-earner households, and an increasingly aging workforce, is making known that this one-size-fits-all workplace just doesn't work for them. Through initial job choices, through job changes, through outspoken demands, today's workers are making it clear that there is a much greater need for flexibility, in other words, for more control over when and where and how work gets done. And they seek a workplace in which they can exercise that control. But as we all know, and why we're here today, this flexibility is not yet fully materialized in any way, either through flexible work arrangements, through time-off policies, be they short-term or long-term, or through any other arrangement to reduce hours over the course of the week or the year. But just as this conference comes at a critically needed time, I think what's most exciting is it's coming at what appears to be a politically propitious time. For those of you who have been following this election, and it'd be very hard not to, both Democratic candidates, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, have made it clear in their policy statements that the needs of working families are going to be much more front and center, and they see workplace flexibility as a solution as one very important solution to meeting those needs. But in just the last week or so, the Republican Party platform for 2008 has also been issued, and it clearly states that there has to be greater attention to meeting the needs of working families as they balance the demands of work and the demands of family. And again, they mention flexibility as a critical solution. So we are seeing it's really coming to fruition what Georgetown has been all about, which is a consensus around the need for bipartisan support for workplace flexibility, and flexibility that meets simultaneously the needs of employers and the needs of employers. Usually what I do at our meetings is give, as Hai called it last night, a State of the Union. I'm going to be very brief, but it just basically gives a sense of where the foundation is going and has gone over the last year. I would say that we at the Foundation have laid out an ambitious agenda regarding the American family and workplace flexibility for the coming year. And as usual, we will be continuing our tradition of supporting research and on working families, changes in the workplace, and workforce flexibility. As I mentioned, through grants to the Sloan Network and the University of Pennsylvania, we have been funding 2 new important programs intended to identify and support the next generation of early career work family scholars. And we are also, through grants made over the course of the last year that will continue into this year, we're supporting the 2 remaining centers on working families, one at UCLA and one at Emory University. We have a board meeting in 2 weeks, and pending board approval, the Boston College Center on Aging and Work will continue its operations for the next 3 years. And throughout the coming year, we are likely to increase our support on aging and work. We see that this is really, as has been clearly demonstrated through our Boston College Center on Aging and Work, that this is an important issue. We will likely increase our support of the economics of aging and work. We have a new president, Paul Joskow, who's an economist, and it's clearly one of his intentions that we continue and increase our support of economists and their engagement on these issues. In the coming year, we're also going to maintain our commitment, our strong commitment to the National Workplace Flexibility Initiative, which we launched in 2003, and which many of you in the room have been active participants of, shapers of, and basically vehicles of change of. This initiative came out of, for those of you who are new to us today, this initiative was really born of the efforts of research that started in the mid-1990s, which clearly identified, as Katie said, this structural mismatch between the way work is organized and the needs of an increasingly diverse workforce. I think that what has been unique to this initiative and will continue is that from the outset, it was designed to follow 2 tracks. One track was the voluntary adoption by employers of workplace flexibility, and then the other track was, in fact, the policy efforts both at the federal and the state levels. And so a number of our grantees who have worked on both tracks are here today, and at the risk of not mentioning someone, I'll mention, obviously, Georgetown, which has been involved in the federal efforts, New America Foundation, which is also working with Georgetown, the Twiga Foundation, which is working with the BC Center at the state level, and also a number of grantees who've been working with us specifically on excuse me, on issues related to the voluntary employer adoption of flexibility. And to that end, we've supported demonstration projects, grassroots advocacy projects, a major awards program that is now in 30 cities nationwide on workplace flexibility, and a number of critical grants and people have been involved in this, and they include Families and Work Institute, Corporate Voices for Working Families, the BOLD Initiative, WFD, Choose to Lead, the MIT Workplace Center, and the Labor Project for Working Families. And without all of not just the individual efforts, which are critical, but the collaborative efforts, because each of these grants and grantees have really worked to leverage one another's efforts, and we continue to really look for the synergy from all the efforts, not just the individual ones. Also, I want to note that although most of and many of our efforts have been directed at looking at change across industries, we have developed some industry-specific funding, particularly in law, healthcare, and higher education. And with regard to higher education, Families and Work Institute and American Council on Education came together several years ago to develop an awards program that would basically recognize those leading universities that have implemented faculty career flexibility. We are now going into the 3rd round of those awards. The first round recognized research universities, the second round recognized master's level, and the 3rd round, pending board approval, will focus on the efforts at liberal arts colleges. And so we look forward to continuing in partnership with ACE on developing this 3rd round of awards. So this is just a thumbnail sketch of where the foundation has been, where we continue to go. We once again are really looking for the marriage of efforts that will bring together the best thinking with the private sector, with the public sector, and with the research community. And I turn this back to Katie and to Hai, because I think that positions us to really get to the next stage, which is what are the critical discussions to make this marriage work with regard to workplace flexibility.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kathleen. And in law school, you learn that, an important thing is to give people a roadmap of where you're going to go. So I'll just give a little overview of today and tomorrow. As you look through the agenda, today we're going to do some really heavy lifting. We're going to hear 4 research papers on hourly and salaried workers and flexibility. We're getting the perspectives of 2 seasoned business practice professionals and 4 folks who have worked on these issues from inside the Beltway, obviously getting at the very conversation Kathleen just mentioned. At the end of the day, we'll be turning to a case study on a recent intersection of research law and business practice through the lens of some recent amendments to the Family and Medical Leave Act on behalf of military families. Then tomorrow, in the interest of making sure that we get the oxygen in the room and the oxygen flowing, we're going to mix up formats, holding 2 roundtable sessions, one with the early career scholars, both from Dr. Steve Sweet's program and some of the centers, and actually a person that works with us here at Georgetown, so that we're going to insert the Legal Academy into the early career panel. And then we're going to be ending with a panel or roundtable with other more senior researchers and others working on these issues, both looking back and then forward again in terms of where we might be going on these issues. And we'll round out the event with what I hope to be some provocative conversation on politics this election year at lunch with a blogger. I was ready to get some new media inserted into this. But we hope that that kind of ends it on a light and fun and provocative note. So I now turn it over to Hy Feldblum to set us up for the next panel. Thank you.
And if I could invite our first panel participants.
Great, we'll get
your
the name tags.
Do you want us to stand up or sit down when we present?
Whatever you guys like.
What do you want to do? Stand up or sit down? Yeah. Okay. And is there a clicker?
If you,
Do you want to click for each other?
now, do you want a clicker? Do we have a clicker?
You just said to lean over.
No,
Yeah.
No, okay.
Yeah, we'll do it.
So let me just show you. Oops. Let me just. So we're starting with. Which one is
That one.
that one? Where's the other one? No, one I'd like to see that. Okay. But let me just make sure we have.
Oh, some things didn't come across.
Why?
Well, you'll see.
Okay. But
Maureen.
somewhere. So we'll just do that. So that it's easy to go.
I can see him quick if you want.
That was a, it's fine.
Anyway, that's what it is. That will go down. So, all right. Welcome, folks. I'm going to be a moderator with a nice lavalier mic, so that means I'm not even going to be sitting up here. Again, this is a place where we often have a lot of the some major talks of guests, etc. And the faculty know that they come and they sit in all the comfortable chairs on the side. So as your moderator, I'll be right there. But I'm thrilled to be able to welcome this first panel. You've got the bios of everybody in your folder, so I'm not going to belabor the bios. I can also just tell you, as you all know, that the few paragraphs you have here is only, 2 of what everyone could have written 15 paragraphs. But what I'm going to say in terms of the 2 speakers is stuff that's not in the bio, because you can read the bios. And I'll actually give you your first sentence of each. So you'll hear first from Jennifer Swanberg, who is the executive director and founder of the Institute for Workplace Innovation at the University of Kentucky, an associate professor in the UK College of Social Work with joint appointments in the Colleges of Medicine and Public Health. And then the second paper you will hear is from Maureen Perry Jenkins, who's an associate professor of psychology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and past director of the Center for the Family at UMass. But the stuff that doesn't come You know, in this, I will say that I first met Jennifer at a meeting that Kathleen pulled together at the Sloan Foundation on, you know, one of the many issues we were talking about, and it was fantastic to meet Jennifer and had a great time, and that was something like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and I said, we're going to have Jennifer at something. I don't know where, what, how, but we're going to bring Jennifer into this. And then this past fall, I was very lucky to be able to go to the Penn State conference that Nan Crowder and others put together, and had the absolute joy of hearing both Susan Lambert and Maureen Perry Jenkins. And I knew for sure, again, not knowing where, how, what, but that we wanted to bring Maureen here. So those are going to be your two main papers that you're going to hear. First, sort of data on sort of the more quantitative data on hourly workers' access to workplace flexibility as we broadly define it, and then more qualitative as well as just sort of impact on the family information from Maureen. And then, as you heard from Katie, we've asked for 3 respondents, and we have told our respondents they do not have to prepare anything. We don't want them to prepare anything before. We want them to respond, to react. You know, and having just heard these 2 papers, Arlene Johnson from WFD, many of you know, long-term respected researcher of business practice. You know, from a business practice perspective, what is her reaction? And then Susan Hatton and Peter Reinecke. Everything we do at Workplace Flexibility 2010 in Washington, you know, if you want to get the public policy perspective and you're really being real about saying you want a consensus-based approach, you need to have someone with a strong Democratic pedigree, someone with a strong Republican pedigree, because otherwise you're just faking it, you know? But we are not faking it with these 2 folks on the end here. I assure you, Susan Hatton, a longtime staff director for Senator Kassenbaum-Baker, Peter Reinecke, longtime staff director, whatever the title was for Tom Hawken, Senator Tom Hawken, both incredibly wonderful people. Susan Hatton is on our National Advisory Commission on workplace flexibility, and Peter Reinecke, who has a private consulting firm, now consults with us. This is when Katie and I get stuck, we sometimes look at each other and say, let's just call Peter. I am looking forward to this panel. Sharon will hold up the 5 minutes and the time. 25 minutes for the papers, although you can go to 30 until I come get you off the table here. And then about 7 minutes for our discussants. But we will also take a break at 10:45. So let the show begin.
Great. Thank you, Hi. Good morning. So I see that in the translation of going from PowerPoint on my computer to this computer, we've lost a few things. So we'll hopefully it hasn't affected the tables, because if they have, we'll have to have a little break. I can't present data without tables. So I want to thank Hi and Katie for arranging what looks like a very dynamic and thoughtful agenda, and I really appreciate the new perspective. I'm particularly excited that they've included in their agenda a focus on low-wage jobs and how they affect working families. And I'm particularly honored that they asked me to present to an esteemed group of scholars. So thank you to Hi and Katie. And I'd also like to thank Kathleen Christensen for her and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation's continued support on organizations in contemporary family life. Okay.
I think it's this one.
Which one? Okay. All right?
Yep.
You people who like Macs. Oh, no. So I have 3 primary objectives for my presentation today. First, I want to identify a low-wage job. What is a low-wage job? And I think many people in the audience know what that is, but I think we need to be clear about what it is and what it isn't. And then secondly, I'm going to examine the prevalence of workplace flexibility among low-wage jobs using both the National Study of the Changing Workforce and then also findings from a variety of different studies. And then we're going to discuss the business case and whether or not there is a business case and what are some of the conflicting ideologies around whether there's a business case for workplace flexibility. Yeah, either one is fine. So today there's about 40 million jobs in the United States That's 1 in 3 jobs pay low wages. And the number of low-wage hourly jobs in the United States has been steadily increasing as we've witnessed the closing of manufacturing plants, the reduction of union jobs, and the emergence of a service economy. Low-wage jobs often necessitate traditional schedules, unpredictable schedule requirements, and minimal control over working hours. According to papers by Kallenberg, Cossack, and Lambert, employers use strategies such as part-time work, or employer strategies such as part-time work and benefit waiting periods create significant barriers to accessing work-life supports like workplace flexibility. Bond et al., Golden, Richmond, and others have found that workers in less privileged positions, those people in low-wage jobs and non-exempt jobs, are less likely than their higher-paid counterparts to have access to a variety of workplace flexibility. Likewise, low-wage workers are less likely to have access to any form of paid leave. Jody Hyman, in her book The Widening Gap, suggests that 76% of working parents in the bottom quartile of the income distribution do not have paid sick time. 58% do not have vacation leave, and about 54% do not have vacation or sick time. So it seems that the employees who are among the most vulnerable to the associated consequences of work-life conflict because of both their limited financial resources and their limited power within organizations are less likely, they're the least likely to have access to the workplace solutions that could assist managing their work and family life. And until recently, most of the studies of workplace flexibility have focused on employers in professional occupations with minimal attention to the employment circumstances of low-wage jobs. As we begin to understand the meaning of workplace flexibility for workers in low-wage jobs, what we're finding, practitioners and scholars alike, is that flexible work initiatives developed for professional workers are not easily transferable to workers in low-wage jobs. And as a result, sometimes managers and supervisors often deem workplace flexibility impossible or too costly to implement. However, emerging trends from the people who are doing research in this area show promising results when workplace flexibility is designed to fit the unique circumstances of low-wage job. I'd like to note that while my presentation focuses on workplace flexibility, I think we all recognize that workplace flexibility is just one critical component to creating a quality workplace for this population of workers. Ellen Galinsky and the Families and Work Institute uses the language of an effective workplace. Marcy Pitt-Kassoufis at her center focuses the work around the context of employment. But whatever the language, to adequately understand the burden that low-wage jobs places on the people who are in them, and to change the organizational structures and processes that reduce these burdens, we must consider workplace flexibility within the context of the whole job. So what is a low-wage job? You've been staring at this slide. We'll keep this slide, right? So many of us know that low-wage job traditionally is called kind of non-exempt as it's stipulated by the Fair Labor Standards Act. However, there really is no kind of common or traditional standard measure of a low-wage job. Traditionally in the United States, we use the basic income approach, which is the U.S. poverty threshold. In Europe, they tend to use the social inclusion approach. The social inclusion approach is a measurement criteria that compares wages with other jobs as opposed to looking at it from a basic income approach. So similar to models, the European models of social inclusion, the Center for Economic and Policy Research suggests that a U.S. social inclusion approach to measuring poverty would assess the extent to which low-paid workers fall behind the rest of the workforce in terms of both wages and income, but also in a variety of other dimensions such as health and education. So given the inherent limitations of the poverty line, I've chosen to adopt the social inclusion approach when I analyze the data for this presentation. And the social inclusion approach suggests, or the calculation that I used, was 2/3 of the median wage for men. And the median wage, I'm sorry to talk about research here, the median wage is used for men rather than for all workers as an attempt to try to limit the extent to which gender inequality affects the definition of low-wage work. So in 2006, when we used that definition, 1 in 3 workers earned low wages. Next slide. So as a context, this graph demonstrates that workers in low-wage jobs have not experienced gains in wage growth over the last few decades. And in fact, as you can see at the end, there's a widening gap between the low-wage workers and the hourly wage earners. So as I suggested, I'm going to be using a variety of different sources for my presentation today. I pull from the National Study of the Changing Workforce, the 2002 data set, to look at the prevalence of the different types of flexible work arrangements. And then I'll also be weaving in findings from workplace-based studies that some of you in this audience have conducted. So what we find from the national study is that 60% of wage and salaried workers classified themselves as non-exempt workers, and among this population, 43% earn low wages. And while some of the analyses that I'll be presenting, compared low-wage hourly workers with other workers. And I know some of my colleagues often compare low-wage workers with salaried workers. And I opted not to do that because the structures and the processes inherent to non-exempt workers and the laws that inform them are very different than exempt workers. So my feeling is that if we really want to update the structures of low-wage jobs to better fit the needs of the 21st century workforce, we have to have different approaches. And we have to approach this in a manner different from how we would normally approach changing structures for professional jobs. You'll also notice in my slides, kind of in the spirit of trying to have a slightly less academic perspective here, I did not put the citations of some of the research that I've used. I trust there's a lot of scholars in the room whose work is represented here, and if you want a bibliography of the work that I integrated, just let me know. So I have a tight timeline, so says the boss. So I'm going to move quickly. So here what we see, the next set of slides is going to focus on industry, occupational, and job characteristics. So the top three industries represented among low-wage jobs are, not surprising, retail, manufacturing, and medical services, with retail paying the lowest and construction paying the highest. Next, what we see in terms of occupations, the most heavily represented are traditional blue-collar jobs of production, repair, and operations, followed by service occupations and administrative positions. And again, not surprising, we see that retail pays the least and blue-collar pays the most within that. Next slide. As noted in several workplace-based studies of low-wage work, low-wage workers have the characteristics that are mentioned here. They tend to be disproportionately women, identify as not white. I think what's particularly interesting here is that 64% of workers that are paid low wages have less than a high school or less, have a high school degree or less. There we go. Compared to other income workers, here we see that low-wage workers are less likely to work full-time, they have shorter job tenures, and they're less likely to work a standard 9-to-5 job. We see that 40% work non-traditional work hours. This is similar to research that Presser has done. Next slide. And on average, full-time employees work nearly 39.5 hours a week, with about an average of 4.5 hours in overtime, and part-time workers work about 22 hours a week with about 3 hours of overtime. And not surprisingly, what we see, next slide, is that one job is not enough. About 15% of low-wage workers work a job in addition to what they consider their main job. And what we see here is that 56% of full-time workers are working on a second job. And obviously the part-time workers, 44% are working a second job as well. So as researchers, policy analysts, and scholars, our emphasis, as Kathleen and I have mentioned today, our emphasis on workplace flexibility rests on the supposition that we believe flexibility is an antidote to the fundamental mismatch between the structures of many jobs and the needs of working family. The most broadest definition describes that workplace flexibility is defined how, when, and work gets done and how careers are organized. But if you break that down and you think about what the traditional job is for an hourly worker, there's some things that don't necessarily fit perfectly. And as some of you who have tried to measure flexibility in our surveys, you know it's really complicated and there's lots of definitions. And depending on who it is that you're interviewing, the definitions could be very different. In fact, the National Study of the Changing Workforce in 2002 had 15 different types of workplace flexibility, and I'm sure there's more in the 2007 data. In her forthcoming book chapter, Ellen Kosick argues for a national standard definition of flexible workplace policies. Similarly, Susan Lambert, Julia Henley, and I suggest that we not only need a standard definition of workplace flexibility, but we need definitions that cut across job categories to capture the nuanced effects in the job structures and processes within and across exempt and non-exempt workers. And I believe that without a shared language, it makes it very difficult for us to fully understand which jobs provide the types of workplace flexibility and which employees have the access to the different forms of flexibility. And then without this shared information, it makes it very difficult to recommend workplace policies and public policy solutions. So fortunately for us, Katie and Hai and their team at Workplace Flexibility 2010 have kind of categorized flexibility for us into kind of 3 areas. That's flexible work arrangements, time off, and then all right. Yeah. So, all right. Little comic relief, never hurt. So anyway, as I was saying, that they've kind of defined flexibility into kind of these 3 categories. And for the purpose of the presentation, I'm going to focus primarily on flexible work arrangements and time off. And for some of you who may be new to this, I just thought I would kind of narrate this slide a little bit. Within the flexible work arrangements, they've divided into kind of 2 other categories. So for employees in jobs with traditionally long hours and fixed schedule, a flexible work arrangement is having flexibility in scheduling of hours and the amount of hours worked and the place of work. For employees with traditionally less than full-time hours and unpredictable scheduling, flexible work arrangements provide workers with greater predictability and control over their hours. Time off provides leave from work for a defined period of time to address unexpected or planned events. And as Kathleen and others have mentioned, there's short-time time off, episodic time off, and then extended time off. And I'm going to use these categories as I kind of describe the findings and the prevalence of flexible work arrangements. I should also note that people who have been focusing on, next slide, who have been focusing on low-wage workers have further deconstructed, and I love that word because it seems like an academic word, right? You know, I can't use that with the business community, but I can use it here. So I'm going to say it again. Researchers examining low-wage jobs have further deconstructed the meaning of workplace flexibility. So Lambert, Henley, Swanberg, and others suggest that workplace flexibility within low-wage job constitutes having some type of schedule predictability, both in terms of the number of hours that they're scheduled to work, when they're scheduled to work, and having advance notice as to when they're scheduled to work. Other studies have shown that having control or input into their preferred schedule is also another aspect of workplace flexibility. Shelley McDermott's recent analysis of the 2002 National Study of the Changing Workforce suggests that workplace flexibility is comprised of various dimensions, including authority, policy, opportunity, and support. And low-wage workers generally have less authority in their jobs compared to the non-exempt or the exempt counterpart. So next I'm going to start looking at the prevalence of flexible work arrangements and time off. And it's important to note that the variables that are available in large data sets, for any of you who have been trying to kind of understand flexibility, do not necessarily map on to these measures or these kind of categories. And some of that is because of because this is a moving target. We're creating science as we go along. And slowly, and hopefully I think in the 2007 data, there's some new measures that have been informed by the research that people have been doing in here. So I'll be looking at flexible work arrangements as that's been defined by Workplace 20, no, what's the name of you? So we're going to look at flexible work arrangements and time off. Okay. So the first form of flexible work arrangement is scheduling of work hours. And let's see how this plays out. 37% of low-wage workers state that they can choose their own start and quitting times. It's not surprising, given the nature of the work, right? Wouldn't work at Marriott for people to come in and out as they please. And among this group, only 42% can do this on a daily basis. And I'm going to come back to the issue of scheduling in a minute. Next. When we look at the when we look at the amount of hours worked, to me the takeaway slide here is that some of the available standard survey measures of flexibility around hours work may not really adequately capture the experiences of low-wage workers. So we see that 52% of workers say that they could move to full-time or part-time depending on what their job is. I think, and then in an attempt to try to map this further, to try to understand what this means, we then looked at what percentage of part-time workers would want to work full-time. And we see that 36% of part-time workers would like to work full-time. And surprisingly, only 21% of full-time workers would like to work part-time. I know I'd like to work part-time. Next. The next is the place of work. And here we see, 3% of people work at home regularly, and only 19% of the low-wage workers ever bring work home. So again, I think this really shows that some of the measures that we have do not really capture what the experiences are of low-wage workers. The next issue is schedule control and predictability. Oh, sure. Okay, so low wage for 2002 was workers that made $10.88 per hour or less, and other wage are non-exempt workers who earned more than $10.88. Sorry about that. Right, so these are all non-exempt workers. And I was saying earlier, I opted to compare the non-exempt groups to each other because I think they have similar job structures. And if we're going to really think about how to modify workplace practices for this category of workers, it was easier to kind of compare likes with likes. Schedule control and predictability, as Maureen's research will illustrate, the lack of control and knowing when workers will be scheduled to work places significant strain on working families. So here we see that 38% of low-wage workers say that they have complete or a lot of control over their hours. And again, they're low-wage hourly workers, the non-exempt categories. And we see that in the goods-producing industry, this number decreases to about 34% compared to about 39% for the service sector. Only about 56% of workers state that they have some control over when they take breaks. And while this may not seem like a big deal, for those of us who have access to a telephone at any time of day to either receive a call from a family member or make a call, this has significant strain on working families. 33% of workers experience layoffs or reduction of work hours when work is slow. And while this, I think, is important, it may not capture kind of the weekly fluctuations.
Unbelievable.
A fire. Stay tuned.
Jennifer, it's so interesting. I'm just like, it's great. I'm really focused. I'm looking at the
That's good. Oh, I guess the false alarm was a pulse.
No, I know, you prefer to be.